June 18, 2020, 7:47 a.m. Munich, Germany. A payment processing company worth 24 billion euros was about to admit something impossible. The cash they'd been reporting on their balance sheets for years, 1.9 billion euros held in Philippine bank accounts, didn't exist. Not stolen, not hidden, just gone. By noon, the stock had collapsed 75%. Within a week, Wirecard, once Germany's tech pride, a member of the elite DAX 30 index, would cease to exist entirely. 20,000 jobs vanished. Billions in investor savings wiped out. But here's what makes this different from every other corporate fraud you've heard about. The regulators knew. The journalists knew. The whistleblowers screamed warnings for 5 years. And instead of investigating the company, Germany's financial watchdog went after the people telling the truth. How does 1.9 billion euros just disappear? How did auditors sign off on accounts that were completely fabricated? And why did one of Europe's most powerful financial regulators protect the fraud instead of stopping it? This is the story of Wirecard, the story of how ambition, national pride, and a carefully constructed web of lies created Europe's biggest accounting scandal, and how one man, the chief operating officer, escaped to Russia, where he remains today, wanted by Interpol, living openly in Moscow. To understand how this happened, you need to understand what Germany desperately wanted in the 2010s. Silicon Valley was eating the world. Amazon, Google, Facebook, American tech giants worth hundreds of billions. China had Alibaba, Tencent. Europe had banks and car manufacturers, old economy, last century's winners. Germany felt this acutely. The 2008 financial crisis had exposed weaknesses in Deutsche Bank. Volkswagen's diesel emissions scandal in 2015 shattered trust in German engineering. The country that built Mercedes-Benz and BMW was watching American teenagers in hoodies build companies worth more than their entire automotive sector. Politicians were desperate for a German unicorn, a tech success story, proof that Germany could compete. Enter Fintech, the intersection of finance and technology. Digital payments, mobile wallets, the promise of making cash obsolete. Visa and MasterCard were printing money, taking tiny cuts from billions of transactions. PayPal was worth $40 billion. China's Alipay was processing more transactions than all American credit cards combined. This wasn't just business, this was the future of money itself. And Germany had a company that looked like it could win, a payment processor that worked with major airlines, retailers, mobile phone companies, a company that claimed to be conquering Asia, the world's largest underbanked market, a company whose revenue was growing 30, 40, 50% year after year. Wirecard. On paper, it was perfect, listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, audited by Ernst & Young, one of the big four accounting firms, regulated by BaFin, Germany's strict financial watchdog, clean books, explosive growth. A buttoned-up CEO with a PhD who spoke the language of bankers and regulators. By 2018, Wirecard's valuation hit 24 billion euros. It replaced Commerzbank in the DAX 30, Germany's most prestigious stock index. Think of it as Germany's S&P 30. Only the biggest, most trusted companies make the list. Volkswagen, Siemens, BMW, and now Wirecard. Chancellor Angela Merkel personally promoted the company during a state visit to China. A digital champion, she called it. Germany's answer to Silicon Valley. The business model seems straightforward. You tap your phone to pay for coffee. That transaction goes through Wirecard's servers. They verify it's legitimate, route it to your bank, send the money to the merchant. Wirecard takes a fraction of a cent. Do that 3 billion times a day across the world and you're making serious money. They also offered something else, access to risky markets, online gambling sites, adult entertainment, forex traders. Businesses that traditional banks wouldn't touch. Wirecard didn't care. They'd process anything, anywhere. High risk, high reward. By 2019, the company claimed to process over $125 billion in transactions annually. 300,000 clients worldwide, partnerships with Alipay, WeChat Pay, Apple, Google, offices in 26 countries. The CEO, Markus Braun, owned 7% of the company. On paper, he was worth over €1 billion. He lived in a €10 million penthouse, but he wasn't flashy. No Ferraris, no yachts, just expensive suits and conference rooms. And next to him, the man running Asia operations, the engine of Wirecard's growth, Jan Marsalek, Austrian, 38 years old. Joined the company when he was 20, worked his way up to chief operating officer, managed Singapore, Dubai, Manila, all the mysterious third-party partners generating over half of Wirecard's profits. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. Because in quiet corners of the financial world, some people were asking questions nobody wanted to hear. Wirecard wasn't always respectable. In fact, it started in the shadows. The company was founded in 1999 during the first dot-com boom. Originally, it processed payments for online poker sites and adult websites, the businesses that Visa and MasterCard wouldn't touch. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, Wirecard nearly collapsed. Enter Markus Braun in 2002. Born in Vienna in 1969. Son of a school teacher and a folk high school director. Not wealthy, not connected, just smart. He studied computer science and business at the Technical University of Vienna, then earned a PhD in economics. Before Wirecard, He worked in consulting and tech investing, serious, analytical, the opposite of a Silicon Valley bro. When Braun took over as CEO, Wirecard was worth almost nothing. He saw an opportunity. Payment processing was fragmented, expensive, and stuck in the 20th century. Braun's pitch was elegant. We'll build the infrastructure to make digital payments seamless, fast, and global. He pivoted away from the sketchy origins. Landed contracts with airlines Lufthansa, KLM, Qatar Airways, retail giants like Aldi, Transport for London, legitimate clients. In 2005, Wirecard went public. The company began raising capital and buying smaller payment processors across Europe and Asia. Braun's strategy was buy and build, acquire companies with existing payment networks, integrate them into Wirecard's platform, scale up. The growth was spectacular. Revenue in 2005, 100 million euros. By 2010, 300 million. By 2015, 1 billion. Every year, 30 to 50% growth. Investors loved it. In 2015, Wirecard made a big move, entering India. They acquired payment processors for 340 million euros. The founders of those businesses had tried to raise funding at 46 million euros and failed. Wirecard paid 7 times that. Critics asked why. Wirecard's answer, our technology is superior and India's cashless market is about to explode. That same year, Wirecard launched Boon, a mobile payment app competing with Apple Pay. It worked anywhere MasterCard was accepted. The vision? Cut out the banks entirely, make Wirecard the layer between consumers and merchants. The company was partnering with the biggest names in tech. In 2015, they signed with Alipay to help Chinese tourists pay across Europe. In 2017, WeChat Pay. By 2018, integration with Google Pay and Apple Pay. Wirecard wasn't just growing, they were becoming essential infrastructure. Then came the big moment. September 2018, Wirecard joined the DAX 30, replacing Commerzbank, one of Germany's oldest banks. The symbolism was perfect, old finance dying, new fintech rising. Braun, in his trademark dark suit and rimless glasses, smiled for the cameras. He'd done it. The stock price climbed from 10 euros in 2014 to 190 euros in 2018. Peak valuation 24 billion euros. Bigger than Deutsche Bank. SoftBank, the Japanese conglomerate that had made billions betting on Alibaba and Uber, poured 900 million euros into Wirecard. Their CEO, Masayoshi Son, called it one of the most exciting fintech companies in the world. Braun was named Germany's best CEO by Manager magazine. Forbes called him a visionary. He sat on advisory boards. Gave speeches about artificial intelligence and machine learning transforming payments. Wirecard, he claimed, used advanced AI to detect fraud and optimize transaction routing, cutting-edge stuff. Behind the scenes, former employees would later say those AI systems barely existed. They were cobbling together spreadsheets manually. But nobody was looking behind the scenes, not the auditors, not the regulators, not the investors. The magic was in Asia, Singapore, Dubai, Manila, 3 arm's-length partners generating over half of Wirecard's revenue and all of its profits. These weren't Wirecard's own offices. They were third-party processors, companies Wirecard claimed worked exclusively with them. The arrangement was unusual but made sense on paper. Wirecard's brand opened doors with big clients like airlines and telecoms. The third-party partners handled the messy work of processing millions of small transactions in places like India, Thailand, Malaysia. The profits, hundreds of millions of euros, went into escrow accounts managed by trustees. Wirecard reported those profits, but the cash stayed offshore. Investors asked, why not bring the money back to Germany? Wirecard's answer, reinvesting in growth, expanding the network, dominating Asia before anyone else could. Fair enough, Amazon didn't turn a profit for years either, right? Reinvest everything, dominate the market first, print money later. By 2019, Wirecard was untouchable, stock at an all-time high, new clients every quarter, expansion into North America and Latin America. Markus Braun was worth over €1 billion. He'd borrowed 150 million from Deutsche Bank, using his Wirecard shares as collateral, to buy even more stock. He believed in the company that much. Or so it seemed. Because by 2019, cracks were starting to show. Not in Wirecard's press releases or quarterly earnings, but in the places nobody wanted to look. The first person to publicly question Wirecard was a hedge fund manager named John Hempton, back in 2014. He called a journalist at the Financial Times and asked a simple question. Would you be interested in some German gangsters? That journalist was Dan McCrum, 35 years old, British, worked in the FT's Alphaville blog covering markets and corporate finance. He'd cut his teeth analyzing companies during the 2008 financial crisis. He knew how to read between the lines of balance sheets. Hempton's tip was specific. Wirecard's acquisitions in Asia didn't make sense. They were paying absurd prices for tiny companies. The revenues being reported didn't match the reality on the ground. McCrum started digging. In April 2015, he published his first blog post, The House of Wirecard. It was measured, careful. He didn't accuse them of fraud. He just asked questions. Why are you paying 7 times the valuation for Indian companies that couldn't raise funding? Where exactly is all this Asian revenue coming from? Why are your third-party partners so secretive? Wirecard's response was immediate and aggressive. They called the article defamatory, threatened to sue, sent executives to meet with McCrum's boss, trying to kill the story. They claimed the Financial Times was in league with short sellers, hedge funds betting against Wirecard's stock. In 2016, a detailed report appeared, the Zatara Report, 101 pages documenting alleged fraud and money laundering at Wirecard. It was written by Fraser Paring, a British short seller, and sent to BaFin, Germany's financial regulator. BaFin's response? They investigated Fraser Paring for market manipulation, not Wirecard, the whistleblower. Around the same time, an analyst at Mirabaud Securities named Neil Campling noticed something odd. Markus Braun, Wirecard's CEO, had taken out a €150 million margin loan from Deutsche Bank, using half his shares as collateral. If Wirecard's stock price dropped to €95, the loan would be called and Braun would lose his shares. Campling noticed that every time the stock approached that level, Wirecard would conveniently announce a new partnership or positive press release. The stock would bounce back. Suspicious timing. Campling sent his findings to BaFin in January 2019. No response. McCrum kept investigating. He flew to Bahrain to visit a company listed as a major Wirecard client. The address led to an empty office. No employees. No business operations. A shell. He traveled to Singapore and Manila, knocking on doors of Wirecard's supposed third-party partners. Some addresses didn't exist. Others were empty buildings. One major client had never heard of Wirecard. Then came the breakthrough. In 2018, a whistleblower from inside Wirecard contacted McCrum, a lawyer who'd worked for the company and kept copies of internal emails, 70 gigabytes of data, forged contracts, fake invoices. Round-tripping, money going in circles to inflate revenue, evidence of systematic fraud. McCrum spent 3 months analyzing the documents in a windowless room at the Financial Times, using an air-gapped computer for security. For extra caution, the FT team referred to the investigation internally as Project Ahab. Wirecard was McCrum's white whale. On January 30, 2019, the Financial Times published the bombshell. Executive at Wirecard suspected of using forged contracts. The article detailed backdated agreements, fake clients, and evidence that Wirecard had been systematically inflating its revenues in Singapore and Dubai for years. The stock price dropped 30% in hours. €8 billion in market value, gone. Wirecard's response was scorched earth. They hired private investigators to follow Financial Times journalists. They hacked into phones and computers. They attempted to plant a sting operation to make it look like McCrum was working with short sellers. They offered Paul Murphy, McCrum's editor, a $10 million bribe to kill the story. Murphy refused. Wirecard filed a criminal complaint alleging that the Financial Times was manipulating the market. They claimed journalists had leaked information to hedge funds before publication so the funds could profit from the stock crash. And here's where it gets insane. BaFin, Germany's financial regulator, the agency supposed to protect investors, sided with Wirecard. In February 2019, Felix Heufeld, BaFin's president, announced an unprecedented ban. Short-selling Wirecard stock was now illegal for 2 months. The first time BaFin had ever banned shorting a single company outside of a financial crisis. BaFin's reasoning? Wirecard was a national champion critical to Germany's economy. Short sellers and the media were attacking it unfairly. The company needed protection. Then BaFin did something even worse. They opened a criminal investigation, not into Wirecard, but into Dan McCrum and his colleague Stefania Palma. The journalists faced potential jail time for market manipulation under German securities law. Let that sink in. The people exposing fraud were being investigated. The people committing fraud were being protected. An analyst at Commerzbank, one of Germany's largest banks, published a research note calling the Financial Times article fake news and recommending investors buy Wirecard stock. Days later, the note was quietly removed from Commerzbank's website. Politicians rallied behind Wirecard. Angela Merkel, during a state visit to China, personally vouched for the company. The narrative was clear. Wirecard is a German success story, and foreign media are trying to tear it down. McCrum remembers feeling like it was hopeless. No matter what we wrote, it didn't seem to matter, he said later. I was investigated personally. They constructed sting operations. We were followed around London. It was intimidating. But McCrum kept going. In October 2019, the Financial Times published internal spreadsheets showing clear evidence of fraud in Wirecard's Dublin and Dubai operations. Fake customers, forged bank statements, round-tripping to create the illusion of revenue. This time, something shifted. KPMG, one of the big four accounting firms, was hired by Wirecard to conduct an independent audit. Finally, real scrutiny. The report was due in March 2020. It was delayed until April 28th. When it was published, the findings were damning. KPMG said it could not verify the existence of approximately €1 billion in cash that Wirecard claimed to hold. The third-party partners refused to provide documentation. Bank statements were suspicious. The entire structure looked fraudulent. Wirecard's stock dropped 26% in a single day. But the company insisted, there's an explanation. The auditors don't understand our business model. We'll provide more documentation. This is a misunderstanding. And some investors believed them. The stock recovered slightly. Wirecard had survived scandals before. Maybe they'd survive this too. But EY, Ernst & Young, Wirecard's longtime auditor, was now paying attention. They'd been signing off on Wirecard's accounts for over a decade. If KPMG was right, EY had been either incompetent or complicit. In May 2020, EY began asking uncomfortable questions. Specifically, can we see the bank confirmations for those 1.9 billion euros you claim are in escrow accounts in the Philippines? Wirecard said the money was held by third-party trustees in accounts at two Philippine banks, BDO and BPI. Confidential, sensitive, part of their proprietary third-party structure. EY said, we need written confirmations directly from the banks, not from trustees, from the banks themselves. Wirecard provided documents, official-looking letterheads, bank stamps, signatures, everything seemed in order. Then EY did what they should have done years earlier. They contacted the banks directly, and that's when everything exploded. June 18, 2020, 7:47 a.m. Munich time. Two banks in Manila, BDO and BPI, released a joint statement. The accounts listed in Wirecard's documentation did not exist. The documents submitted to auditors were forgeries. 1.9 billion euros. Gone. Not lost, not stolen, never existed in the first place. Within minutes, Wirecard's stock went into freefall, down 30%, then 50%, then 75%. Trading was halted multiple times. Investors were panic selling. By the close of trading, Wirecard had lost 16 billion euros in market value in one day. At 9:15 a.m., Wirecard released a statement, carefully worded. They were investigating the discrepancy. There appeared to be a deliberate deception by third parties. The company was shocked. They were victims too. Nobody believed them. By midday, journalists were camped outside Wirecard's headquarters in Aschheim, a quiet Munich suburb. Employees were leaving the building in tears. Some had their life savings in Wirecard stock. It was worthless. Behind closed doors, the executive team was in crisis mode. Markus Braun called an emergency board meeting. Where was the money? How could 1.9 billion euros just disappear? Jan Marsalek, the COO, the man who'd managed all the Asian operations where the fake money supposedly was, had an answer. He told the board he was flying to the Philippines immediately. He'd personally recover the funds. He'd straighten this out. Just give him 48 hours. At 6 p.m. that evening, Marsalek boarded a private jet. Destination, Manila. Except he never went to Manila. Flight records later showed the jet changed course mid-air. It landed in Austria. Marsalek got off, disappeared into a car, and vanished. The next day, June 19th, the board fired Marsalek. They publicly announced his termination. Markus Braun, still CEO, released another statement. He was shocked by the fraud. He believed he and Wirecard were victims of a sophisticated deception by Jan Marsalek and others. But investigators weren't buying it. If this fraud had been going on for years, and evidence suggested it had started as early as 2015, how could the CEO not know? Braun approved acquisitions. He signed off on quarterly earnings. He personally vouched for the Asian operations. On June 19th at 10 p.m., Markus Braun resigned as CEO. James Friess, who had literally just been hired the day before as Wirecard's new compliance chief, was named interim CEO. He walked into an inferno. June 22nd, 3 days after Marsalek disappeared, Munich police arrived at Markus Braun's 10 million euro penthouse at 9 p.m. He was arrested on suspicion of accounting fraud, breach of trust, and market manipulation. Bail was set at 5 million euros. He posted it within hours and was released. But Wirecard was out of time. The company owed 3.2 billion euros in debt, loans from dozens of banks. With no revenue and no cash, they couldn't make payments. Credit lines were being cut. Suppliers were demanding immediate payment. It was over. June 25th, 2020. Wirecard AG filed for insolvency. One of Germany's 30 biggest companies gone in 7 days. 20,000 employees were out of work. Some learned they'd been fired via text message. Contractors were owed millions. They'd never see it. Investors had lost everything. Pension funds that held Wirecard stock saw billions disappear. One institutional investor later said he'd lost over 100 million euros. We trusted the auditors. We trusted the regulators. We trusted Germany's financial system. And Jan Marsalek? Interpol issued a red notice, a global arrest warrant, but by then he was already in Russia. Here's how he got there. On June 19th, the day he was supposedly flying to the Philippines, Marsalek actually flew to Vienna. From there, he took a private flight to Minsk, Belarus. From Minsk, he crossed into Russia. The entire escape took less than 24 hours. Russian intelligence had been waiting for him, because this wasn't an emergency escape, this was an extraction. Investigations later revealed that Marsalek had been recruited by Russian military intelligence, the GRU, as early as 2010. For years, while working as Wirecard's COO, he'd been a spy. He'd used Wirecard's money to fund Russian operations in Libya and Syria. He'd opened doors for Russian oligarchs to move money through European financial systems. He'd acquired properties and assets on behalf of Russian intelligence. Wirecard wasn't just a fraud, it was a front. And now Marsalek was gone, living openly in Moscow. Reports placed him in a mansion near the FSB training center in Balashikha, a suburb of Moscow. German and Austrian intelligence confirmed he was under Russian state protection. Putin wasn't handing him over. Marsalek assumed multiple identities. For a while, he used the name of a Russian Orthodox priest, Konstantin Byazov. He traveled on fake passports, Belgian, French, Russian. He underwent cosmetic surgery, a hair transplant to lower his forehead. He dated Tatiana Spiridonova, an FSB-linked linguist with a diplomatic background. In 2024, investigative journalists tracked his phone. It pinged at locations across Moscow, five-star hotels, FSB headquarters, a branch of Transcapital Bank, described by the U.S. Treasury as the heart of Russia's sanctions evasion network, and most disturbingly, near the Ukrainian border. Photos surfaced of Marsalek in Russian military gear wearing a Z patch, Russia's war symbol. He'd been making trips into occupied Ukraine. Meanwhile, back in Germany, Markus Braun was rearrested on July 22, 2020, this time no bail. Prosecutors charged him with fraud, breach of trust, and embezzlement. If convicted on all charges, he faced up to 15 years in prison. Braun's defense: he was deceived. Jan Marsalek ran the fraud. The third-party partners were fake, but Braun didn't know. The auditors didn't catch it. The regulators didn't catch it. How could he be expected to know? But prosecutors weren't convinced. Internal emails showed Braun had approved questionable acquisitions. He'd signed off on financial statements that were obviously fraudulent. And he'd personally benefited, borrowing 150 million euros against shares he knew were artificially inflated. In December 2022, Braun's trial began in Munich. The courtroom was a high-security underground facility in Stadelheim prison, usually reserved for terrorism cases. Braun, wearing a black turtleneck and rimless glasses, sat silently as prosecutors read an 89-page indictment. 700 binders of evidence, over 100 trial dates scheduled. A verdict wasn't expected until late 2024 or 2025. As of today, Braun has been in custody since 2020, over 4 years behind bars, still awaiting a final verdict. In September 2024, a Munich court ordered him to pay 140 million euros in damages for breach of fiduciary duty, but most of Wirecard's money is gone. Investors will never recover their losses. And the 1.9 billion euros? Still missing, likely scattered across shell companies in Singapore, Dubai, Russia, hidden in crypto wallets, converted into real estate in places with no extradition treaties. Investigators traced some of it, a few hundred million to offshore accounts, another chunk into Russian military operations, some into Marsalek's personal escape fund, but most of it vanished into the global shadow banking system, the same system Wirecard had helped build. The human cost of Wirecard was staggering. 20,000 employees lost their jobs overnight. Many had invested their retirement savings in company stock, encouraged by management, who said it was a safe bet. Those retirement accounts became worthless in 72 hours. One former employee described showing up to work on June 26th, the day after insolvency was declared. Security guards were blocking the entrance. His keycard didn't work. He received an email 15 minutes later. Position terminated, effective immediately. Institutional investors lost billions. Pension funds in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria that had held Wirecard stock saw their portfolios collapse. Ordinary people, retirees, teachers, civil servants, opened their statements to find their savings had evaporated. A German teacher later testified that she'd invested 50,000 euros, her entire savings, in Wirecard. It had seemed safe. It was in the DAX 30. Audited by EY, recommended by her financial advisor. Now at 63 years old, she was starting over. Banks that had lent Wirecard over 3 billion euros faced massive write-downs. The money was gone. Wirecard's assets, mostly intangible, like software and client relationships, were worthless. In November 2020, Santander bought Wirecard's core payment processing unit for just 100 million euros. A company once valued at 24 billion sold for scraps. And the trials began. Markus Braun, in custody since July 2020, maintained his innocence. His lawyers argued he was a victim of Jan Marsalek's deception. Yes, there was fraud, but Braun was too trusting, not criminal. He relied on auditors. He relied on the board. He relied on his COO. How was he supposed to know? Prosecutors disagreed. They pointed to specific meetings where Braun approved fake acquisitions. They presented emails showing he knew about questionable accounting practices. They highlighted the margin loan. Why would you borrow 150 million euros if you didn't believe your stock was artificially inflated? 2 other executives were arrested, Burkhard Ley, the former CFO, and Stefan von Erfa, the head of accounting. Both were charged with participating in the fraud. One claimed ignorance. The other eventually cooperated with prosecutors, providing testimony against Braun and Marsalek. A key witness was Oliver Bellenhaus, the Dubai-based head of a Wirecard subsidiary. He turned himself in and confessed to helping orchestrate the fraud. His testimony revealed the mechanics: fake invoices, forged bank statements, phantom clients. He described how Marsalek personally instructed him to create false records. In exchange for cooperation, Bellenhaus received a reduced sentence. But Jan Marsalek, safe in Moscow, the Interpol red notice meant nothing. Russia doesn't extradite its assets, and Marsalek was an asset. In December 2024, a London court revealed that Marsalek had been the ringleader of a Russian spy network in the UK. He'd coordinated surveillance, intimidation, and assassination plots against dissidents and journalists. He'd paid operatives over £200,000. Over 70,000 telegram messages between Marsalek and his spy network were recovered. He wasn't just a fraudster, he was a full-fledged intelligence operative. Then there were the enablers. Ernst & Young, EY, the auditor that signed off on Wirecard's accounts for over a decade. How did they miss 1.9 billion euros of fake cash? How did they not verify the existence of bank accounts? How did they approve financial statements that were obviously fraudulent? EY claimed they were deceived. Wirecard presented forged documents. The third-party structure was complex. They trusted management. But investors weren't buying it. In 2021, Wirecard's insolvency administrator filed a lawsuit against EY for 1.5 billion euros in damages. The case is still ongoing. In 2024, additional lawsuits totaling over 700 million euros were filed by investor groups. EY paid an 11 million euro fine to German regulators for audit failures. But for a firm that makes billions annually, 11 million is pocket change. Critics say EY should be held criminally responsible. But audit firms have powerful legal protections. It's nearly impossible to prove they acted criminally rather than negligently. Then there's BaFin, Germany's financial regulator, the agency that banned short selling to protect Wirecard. The agency that investigated journalists instead of the company. The agency that ignored whistleblowers for years. After Wirecard's collapse, Felix Hufeld, BaFin's president, admitted it was a complete disaster and a shame for Germany. But he defended the short-selling ban, claiming it was justified at the time. The European Commission launched an investigation into whether BaFin broke EU financial reporting rules. The findings were harsh. BaFin had failed spectacularly. They had the tools to investigate. They had the warnings. They chose not to act. Hufeld resigned in disgrace. Germany restructured its financial oversight system, transferring enforcement power from a quasi-official panel with 15 employees and a 6 million euro budget to BaFin itself. But the damage was done. Investors lost faith in German financial regulation. International credibility was shattered. How could the country that prides itself on engineering precision and rule following allow this to happen? And the most infuriating part, BaFin faced no legal consequences. Multiple lawsuits were filed by investors seeking compensation. Every single one was dismissed. German courts ruled that BaFin's job is to protect the financial system, not individual investors. Even catastrophic failures don't create liability. Translation: the regulators who protected fraud cannot be held accountable. The Wirecard scandal wasn't an anomaly, it was a pattern. Enron in 2001, fake energy trades, accounting tricks, auditors who looked the other way. Thousands of employees lost their jobs and pensions. Arthur Andersen, the auditor, collapsed. Bernie Madoff in 2008, a $50 billion Ponzi scheme that ran for decades. The SEC received detailed warnings from whistleblowers. They investigated Madoff multiple times and found nothing, until it was too late. Theranos in 2018, a blood testing company that claimed revolutionary technology. It was all fake. Investors lost hundreds of millions. The founder is now in prison. FTX in 2022, a cryptocurrency exchange worth $32 billion. The founder used customer deposits to make personal investments. $8 billion vanished, he's now serving 25 years. And Wirecard, a German fintech giant worth 24 billion euros, 1.9 billion in fake cash, an international spy ring, and a COO living freely in Moscow. What do they all have in common? First, charismatic leaders. Markus Braun wasn't flashy, but he was credible. PhD, former consultant, he spoke the language of finance. Investors and regulators trusted him because he seemed serious, competent. The opposite of a con man. That was the con. Second, complexity as camouflage. Wirecard's third-party structure was deliberately confusing. Escrow accounts, offshore partners, multiple jurisdictions. If you can't understand the business model, you can't spot the fraud. Third, captured regulators. BaFin didn't just fail to investigate Wirecard, they actively protected it. Why? National pride, political pressure. The desire for a German tech champion overrode their duty to investors. And when Germany's financial watchdog is on your side, you're untouchable. Fourth, silenced whistleblowers. Dan McCrum investigated Wirecard for 5 years. He was followed, hacked, investigated by German authorities. Fraser Paring published a detailed fraud report and faced criminal charges. The system didn't reward truth-tellers. It punished them. Fifth, auditors who don't audit. Ernst & Young signed off on Wirecard's financials for over a decade without verifying the existence of 1.9 billion euros. Think about that. The most basic audit procedure, confirm bank balances, wasn't done. Why? Complexity? Laziness? Or because EY was making millions in annual fees and didn't want to ask hard questions? This is the incentive problem at the heart of modern finance. Auditors are paid by the companies they audit. Regulators want national champions to succeed. Short sellers who expose fraud are vilified. Journalists who investigate are attacked. Everyone has a reason to look the other way. Until it's too late. But there are warning signs, red flags we ignore because we want to believe. Watch for companies that grow impossibly fast in markets that are hard to verify. Wirecard's Asian operations generated over half its revenue, but nobody could visit the clients or verify the contracts. Watch for executives who aggressively attack critics. Wirecard didn't just deny the Financial Times articles. They hired private investigators to stalk journalists. They filed criminal complaints. They tried to bribe editors. Innocent companies don't do that. Watch for complex structures that don't have a clear business justification. Why did Wirecard use third-party processors in Singapore and Dubai? Why were billions held in escrow accounts managed by mysterious trustees? Complexity hides fraud. Watch for regulatory capture. When governments start promoting a company as a national champion, be suspicious. Political praise is not due diligence. And watch for auditors who rubber stamp. If a Big Four accounting firm signs off on financials without asking tough questions, that's not assurance. That's complicity. The tragedy is we've known these lessons for decades. After Enron, we reformed accounting standards. After Madoff, we strengthened SEC oversight. After 2008, we passed Dodd-Frank. And yet, Wirecard happened. Because the incentives haven't changed. Auditors still make money by keeping clients happy. Regulators still face political pressure to protect national champions. Whistleblowers still get punished more than perpetrators. And somewhere right now, another fraud is being built. A charismatic CEO is raising billions with a revolutionary story. Auditors are signing off without verifying. Regulators are looking the other way. Journalists who ask questions are being silenced. The cycle will repeat, because we've learned the lessons. We just don't apply them. Today, Markus Braun sits in Stadelheim prison in Munich, awaiting a final verdict. It's been over 4 years since his arrest. The trial has stretched across hundreds of hearing dates. Prosecutors have presented mountains of evidence. Braun's defense has argued he was deceived by his COO. The verdict, when it finally comes, will determine whether he spends the rest of his life in prison or walks free. In September 2024, a civil court ruled Braun must pay 140 million euros in damages, but the money is gone. Wirecard's assets were liquidated for pennies. Investors will recover almost nothing. Jan Marsalek, meanwhile, lives openly in Moscow. In December 2024, a London court disclosed that he ran a Russian spy network in the United Kingdom. Over 70,000 telegram messages revealed assassination plots, surveillance operations, and coordination with Russian military intelligence. He's not just a fugitive, he's an active threat. Germany issued an arrest warrant, Austria did the same. Interpol's red notice remains active, none of it matters, Russia protects its assets. And Marsalek is too valuable to hand over. He knows where the money went, he knows who helped, he knows which politicians and bankers were complicit. As long as he's in Moscow, those secrets stay buried. The 1.9 billion euros? Still missing. Investigators traced some funds to offshore accounts in the Caribbean. Some to Russian military operations in Syria and Libya, some to properties purchased under shell companies. But most of it vanished into the black hole of global finance, converted to cash, laundered through crypto, hidden in jurisdictions with no transparency and no extradition. It's gone, and it's never coming back. Wirecard's collapse destroyed 20,000 jobs. It wiped out billions in retirement savings. It shattered faith in German financial regulation. And it exposed a simple, uncomfortable truth. The system is designed to protect fraud, not stop it. Auditors make money by keeping clients happy. Regulators face political pressure to support national champions. Journalists who investigate are attacked. Whistleblowers are punished. The people who should be catching fraud have every incentive to ignore it. This wasn't a failure of oversight. This was oversight working exactly as designed. And the scariest part? Wirecard wasn't unique. It was just the one that got caught. How many other companies are running similar schemes right now? How many auditors are signing off on fake financials? How many regulators are looking the other way? We don't know. And that's the point. Because fraud doesn't happen in the shadows, it happens in broad daylight, with everyone watching. Wirecard was audited by Ernst & Young, one of the Big Four, regulated by BaFin, one of Europe's strictest watchdogs, promoted by Angela Merkel, trusted by SoftBank, included in the DAX 30. Every institution that should have stopped it enabled it instead. Dan McCrum, the Financial Times journalist who spent 5 years investigating Wirecard, was vindicated. In 2021, he won the Financial Journalism Award, but he said that winning awards doesn't erase the trauma. He was followed, hacked. Investigated by German prosecutors, his career was put at risk for telling the truth. And even now he wonders how many other Wirecards are out there, how many journalists are being silenced, how many frauds are protected by the very institutions supposed to stop them. The answer is we don't know, and we won't know until it's too late. Because the lesson of Wirecard isn't that fraud happens. It's that we let it happen, we ignore the warnings, we silence the whistleblowers. We trust the auditors and regulators who have failed us again and again. We choose to believe, until the lie becomes undeniable. 1.9 billion euros vanished, not stolen, not hidden. Just gone. And Jan Marsalek is still out there, somewhere in Moscow, living under Russian state protection, holding secrets that could destroy careers, topple governments, expose the rot at the heart of global finance. But those secrets will stay buried, because that's how the system works. The fraud was exposed, the company collapsed, the stock became worthless. But the people who enabled it, the auditors, the regulators, the politicians, the banks, they're still there, still signing off on financials, still protecting national champions, still ignoring whistleblowers, still building the next Wirecard,